everyone. Welcome, guys. Well, as Steve mentioned, we are doing now, this is navigating the social etiquette, or the new social etiquette. And I think it's such a perfect topic because regardless of your political affiliation, you have to admit that social has had such an impact on politics. And it's really just been a force for marketers in politics, as well as fundraising, and just invigorating the base, and at very little cost in many instances. So it's just been an asset, although we're seeing a lot of changes now. And that's what we're going to talk about, because they are definitely causing a little confusion. There's no real, every platform's a little different. It's kind of, navigating is a great way to talk about it. So first, let me have my panel introduce themselves and give us a little bit about what you're doing.
Hey guys, I'm Laura Carlson, the Digital Director at the Democratic Governors Association. I just started at the DGA earlier this year, came from Las Vegas last cycle as Jackie Rosen's Digital Director. So we're the party apparatus to help elect Democratic governors, coming off a great year in 2019. So really excited about the work that we did and will continue to do this year. So we not only help elect our Democratic governors, we help engage and take our elected Dem Govs to the next level. So I run their digital shop there. One of the most fun parts, I think, of being at the DGA is really helping elevate the work that our Democratic governors are doing into the spotlight. I think it's definitely underemphasized compared to some of the federal races. So that's a big push for us this cycle.
Hi, my name is Sean Centers. I'm the Director of Ad Operations at Targeted Victory, and we're a full-service digital agency that works with not just political clients, but we work with advocacy and corporate clients as well. I head up our political advertising and advocacy campaigns for center and center-right clients.
I'm Ryan. Hey, everyone. Chief Digital Officer at the DCCC. See some familiar faces in the crowd. Been with the committee. This is my third cycle in the digital shop. Our committee, yes, does all of the same things that you might expect: fundraising, digital operation for the building itself, but a big piece of our work goes to how we help our campaigns with their digital strategy, too.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, just in terms of social media, I mean, as I mentioned early on, it's been an asset and quite the political tool. How important has social media been to you over these last few years? Well, then we'll start getting into the changes and how that's affecting you.
Yeah, I think it's super important. I think there was a question earlier on the panel previous to this is social debt, and I think that all of us would agree that it's definitely not. That's where the voters are. So I think it's a critical part of our conversation that I'm excited to dig into today.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. People are obviously there, and we want to make sure that we're getting our messaging in front of these voters, especially on the direct response side. So as far as trying to collect emails, solicit donations, social definitely has an outsized role compared to some of the other initiatives we run. Fully
agree. Yeah, even with changing rules, especially for the Democratic Party, like people who don't want to consume political information or a notice to vote live on social too. And so had great success and still have great success with it as a direct response outfit, but still want to think about more ways that we can reach people who we got to talk to but who don't want to hear from us quite yet.
Well, now we're seeing, the authorization requirements and ad bans and just, as I said earlier, the inconsistencies. How are you, 2020 must be a little bit more in turmoil when it comes to your social media, and you can't just keep with, the status quo. Let's start with you, Sean, in terms of getting things moving. What is your focus now? Are you changing things up at all?
Yeah, so as far as some of the ad bans and rule changes across our networks, I think we're seeing a lot of change, obviously, but I think a lot of this, while some of these networks are a little bit more clear as to what their policies are on the election side of things, I think where we've run into a lot more kind of back and forth have been working with issue advocacy groups and how these policies end up becoming a little bit less explicit with those groups and how they can message on the platforms. So it may be easy to say, like, we aren't accepting any sort of political ads, but then these networks get into a situation of what is political. And sometimes we may end up having to place ads that we don't necessarily know how the policy is going to be enforced. So it's been a learning experience for all of us, even on the issue advocacy side and things that may not explicitly seem political at face value.
That's really interesting. Yeah, from our standpoint, the DTREP, right, like a lot of these policies specifically say party committees, campaigns can't run political ads. Even with Twitter's policy before it was a statement, when it was just words from Jack in a tweet thread, we thought that there might be some wiggle room there for party committees because is the DTRIP talking about climate change, an issue ad, or is that a political ad? We read the full policy when it was announced, and it is a political ad. And so it's pretty black and white for us, which leaves room, to develop a strategy that we're still able to talk to people on Facebook, Google, YouTube, et cetera, but knowing that because we're a political advertiser, a lot of limitations are in place for us.
Yeah, I definitely think we can't shrug off the changes. I think they're really significant, regardless of their different levels of spend. Maybe there's not a lot of campaigns or groups currently spending on Twitter, but I think the environmental changes are really significant, especially when we look to Google and we look to our turnout and persuasion operations. So I don't think any of us sitting on the stage can sit here and tell you we have the answer, because the ground is still shifting on a lot of these platforms and environmentally. I think everyone's relieved that Facebook isn't going to be making any major changes that are going to impact us programmatically as political groups right now. But I think they're really significant, and I think we have to engage and have that dialogue. And it's going to affect all of our plans this cycle.
Well, I would think, and you just mentioning even with Twitter, I mean, I feel like Twitter having an ad ban, it's not the worst thing that can happen. Now, what if Facebook suddenly came out and said, okay, we're gonna, ban ads? I mean, what would you do? Would you have a plan B?
Facebook, for me, if they were going to ban ads, kind of like what Laura's saying, would be more of an ecosystem thing, because then I'm thinking through publishers, right, digital publishers, other publishers being like, if there are no ads on Facebook, like, should we also ban ads, or are they just excited to take our business? So the Google thing, I felt pretty strongly against their decision because we knew that it would have ecosystem changes. Felt mostly good about the Facebook announcement, but I think all of it, like, it was 3 days before New Year's Eve when we all found out that Spotify was going to ban political advertising. So I think people, like Laura's saying, need to remember the ecosystem changes, and then also, when we're on calls with Google or Twitter talking about the fact that they just rolled back policies, we're impressing on them the ecosystem piece, impressing on them the disinformation piece that they're not really solving for the public pressure that they're feeling and that they're seeing in the media, and then also impressing on them that, the digital dollars really won't go anywhere. We're just gonna spend them on other resources, other publishers to reach our people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my team has been kind of working on what that plan B would be in the case that Facebook did that, and I think a lot of responsible digital folks are doing that. I don't think there's like an easy or obvious answer, which is why it would be like such a significant change. I also think like another thing that I would point out is that initially when we saw like a lot of these ad bans taking place starting on Twitter, I think you saw some prominent folks out there celebrating that as a positive for our political dialogue in the infrastructure, and I think that a lot of us would beg to differ, and that the alternative to that isn't a positive for the Democratic Party or our political system. So kind of thinking through how that looks if you can't reach people publicly online, it's not great.
Yeah, I think with the amount of digital consumption and everything, as this ecosystem has been touched upon continues to change, I think a lot of us breathed a sigh of relief earlier this week when Facebook announced that they're not really making any drastic changes. But at the same time, I think every cycle we have like some different change. I don't think we're ever having a cycle that our media mix looks exactly like it did the time before. So I think that while these changes are occurring and everything, it allows us to adapt and to grow as marketers as well.
Yeah, and Sean, you mentioned earlier, and I think Amanda earlier talked about how creative now is coming more important to marketers. And can you reiterate and talk about a little bit what we had?
Absolutely. So going into 2017, our company made a large investment in establishing digital-first creative and really trying to make creative seem native to the platform where somebody is consuming it. And with some of these ad bans and everything that are affecting maybe targeting, list sizes, etc., we just think that creative becomes that much more important and becomes a differentiator. You can have all the best targeting in the world, but if it's creative that doesn't resonate with an audience, then what good is it really doing? So I think we're really focusing and trying to dial in on how users are interacting with these platforms and making sure that we have the creative necessary to meet them where they are.
That's a really good, or you should go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think a lot of the buzzwords that you've heard in previous cycles is digital-first creative for your advertising. But I think a really important note, starting last cycle, going into this cycle, is also being platform-specific because it looks different depending on where you're reaching a voter across the different digital platforms.
I get really excited when Sean brings up the creative piece because at the congressional level too, right, a lot of the instinct is you have limited resources, you're running in a congressional district, like you should throw the same spot up that your media firm created on YouTube and on Facebook, and it just, we know from testing, but also just being digital professionals, right, that that's not always the best solution. So thinking about what, I think for YouTube, right, we're not gonna be able to target the way that we used to, so how are we even being more intentional about our YouTube creative? How are we making it seem like it's for people who are about to watch a video that they care about? Hot wings, or the video where they eat a bunch of spicy wings that I love a lot, and bon appetit. And instead of looking like a TV ad, right, which we know, at least on the Dem side, that our audience is trying to escape content like that. They're cord cutters, they don't have TV. And so showing them a TV spot, having a negative effect on their favorability of our candidate or unfavorability of the candidates that we're running against, and also for the important mobilization work, their likelihood to vote too.
And Laura, I really liked what you said when you were talking about not just digital first, but talking about like platform specific creative and everything. And I think that's so important, and especially being able to differentiate your creative on the same platform. So for example, being able to leverage on YouTube, as it's been mentioned, like a 6-second, a 15-second, and then some longer form in order to make sure that we're maximizing our reach and our frequency to these audiences that we're really trying to hit, and making sure that we're just getting in front of different people that consume content in different ways.
But I do have a question. I mean, a lot of people, and I'm assuming you guys as well, have a limited budget. And when you think of all the different platforms and differentiating yourself, how do you guys do it in the most cost-effective way?
So there's not one set solution. It really depends on race to race, kind of looking at your electorate, what audience you're trying to hit, and making sure that you're able to make some of these decisions on the front end. So my team works very closely with our more client-facing teams to media plan on the front end, making sure that we're really just focused on how this race is different. We don't want to have any sort of like cookie cutter media plan that we're using across races, because that would be kind of a detriment to what digital can actually accomplish.
I think one of my favorite questions when working with media firms is asking them, how are you going to shoot this so that it looks good when it's vertical? And then like hearing them kind of pause and short circuit for a little moment. And so just that's an aside, but from the committee perspective, the DCCC just has the ability to spend and try out things, especially last cycle when we had so many special elections, got to test a bunch of different formats, and we had the creative capacity to do that, and we give campaigns that guidance so that they're not wasting their dollars trying to test, or not really, or showing creative that doesn't work well, right? Like we know for a direct response video on Facebook works great when it's an iPhone video and it's vertical. And so we learned that through testing a couple of different cameras and a couple of different, square versus horizontal. I think it's just, since we're an organization that works so closely with our campaigns, on us to try a bunch of things and make sure that they're being resourceful with their limited resources.
Yeah, definitely. I think the challenge is really amplified at the gubernatorial level in a lot of ways too, different in a way that it is from federal campaigns. So it's always a challenge for us. It looks different. I think more different in every state for a governor's race than it would for a Senate or other statewide. So being really specific to the race and targeting it at the state level is really important to us, and prioritizing. It looked different in Kentucky than it did in Louisiana in a big way for us last year. But the other thing I think I would note on this question is good creative doesn't have to be expensive. I think a lot of folks who've done digital on campaigns would tell you that a lot of their best content is just the candidate direct to camera on an iPhone. So that's just another note I'd add.
So being a little bit more organic with what you're creating and just getting, which I think you hear a lot from brands, they're getting more from just events that they're having, or just being out there with a camera or an iPhone or whatever and shooting everything. Are you, so across the line, you're finding that that's definitely an advantage?
I think one of my favorite examples of this was when last cycle Beto's race took off with that really, like, you could kind of hear it, but iPhone video became a now this video of him talking about Black Lives Matter and what that means in rural Texas, and just how that was shot on a camera that was not professional, like single camera, shaky iPhone, and it went viral and helped him raise so much and helped his poll numbers, like really showed that people crave content like that. I remember watching that on Twitter being like, this is great, like this is what I normally would go to on Twitter. And so I think people are finding that. I think people know that ads that are made for TV or ads that are shot with like a really nice, not even DSLR, but like the camera above that, don't look for them. Like the content that our voters, people who are unlikely to vote, want to see is content that content creators are making. They're scrappy, they have iPhones, consumer grade cameras, and that's the content that the creative that we try to show people too.
I agree with that. I think at the same time that you are going to sometimes have candidates who maybe direct to camera, it doesn't seem like it's a natural fit for them. And at that point, trying to force that in order to just try and jump on the bandwagon of what other people have seen work, I think is also something that could potentially be problematic. So I think making sure that you're creating creative that feels natural to your candidate and your race itself is also helpful.
Okay, well, what also now we're seeing a lot of with the privacy laws getting into data, which is something that no one really likes to talk about, but there's so many more limitations, and how are you dealing with that? Are you becoming less data focused and going elsewhere, or do you have other ways that you're sort of, grasping onto what you need to do?
Well, data is always going to play a huge part in what we're doing. There are definitely going to be places where we can continue to leverage data and make sure that we are hitting these people that have been identified as being critical. At the same time, this once again goes back to just the focus on creative. I think if targeting can do a little bit less of the lift, I think then the creative just becomes even more important. We're going to keep using data, but we're changing how we're media planning, obviously, just because data is not going to take you as far as it did previously, but making sure that we are kind of hitting our audience and also making sure that we're not kind of handcuffed by the data. A lot of times it's very easy to just upload a file and away we go, but making sure that now that a lot of times we're withheld to match rates that maybe aren't ideal on that data, and we're missing some of our audience. So making sure that we're using other methods to really hit them as opposed to just uploading the file and whoever we get, we get.
I do, from the data perspective and platforms changing rules, I do think that it will be a cycle where folks are over-relying maybe on Facebook when they crave first-party data, voter file data, donor data, supporter data, et cetera. And I do think it returns back a little bit to the creative conversation, knowing we can't target people the same way we used to on YouTube, we just have to make the best YouTube video ever. And then something that was really interesting to me at the end of the 2018 cycle, or all the postmortems from that cycle, is this, at least on the Dem side, starting to dig in with our data partners to understand the models a little bit more, and this integration between the data team on campaigns, which is really how are we hitting field, phone, and door goals, with the digital goal of we're serving media to people. We need to be talking about what models you're using to reach voters on the doors and what models we're using to reach voters online. And I think by partnering together with people to understand their models a little bit more, like expecting questions from digital people a little bit more, like, okay, you're telling me that this group of women in this suburban district from your model are likely to support us, but we're noticing that you have a bigger size in the universe that we know of voters who live in that district who are women. And so just asking more critical questions so that we can still rely on the third-party data that we need. But I think from the Dem side, right, like a little unease in the fact that we won't be able to use first-party data the way that we were obsessed with it last cycle and in 2016.
I would just add, I don't think the changes that we're seeing on YouTube are going to make data less important. I think using it thoughtfully to think about now where we're able to target the voters we need to is going to be really key, like cross-platform and across the different departments of the campaign. Thinking about where we can reach people and analyzing it thoughtfully. I think it's going to remain just as important, even if we're not able to use it in the same way as we did last cycle.
So even though you maybe have less, if you, I guess, and give me an example of how you might use it more effectively.
I think that, I don't think that we'll have less data. I think we're going to have a lot of the same amount of like information on voters and targeting and modeling of who we need to reach. I think it's then the outward-facing way, right? We're not able to apply it in the same way on a number of the social platforms that we're talking about. So I think it's just your media mix. And then again, as Ryan was talking about, maybe that's someone that we can reach like peer-to-peer or on a different team of the campaign more effectively now that we can't target them directly online.
Now, when you do talk about your media plan, and I know that we can't talk too specifically, but just in general, given what you've been going through and what you know now leading into the future, I know a lot of it, which you've mentioned, Ryan, before, there's a lot of testing, but how are you moving forward with your media plan?
Moving forward with the media plan, the big thing, right, I think coming out of the Google change was the fact that their platform, DV360, which we used for programmatic buying last cycle, we can't rely on anymore because we can't use the data that we can't use our first-party lists anymore on that platform, or the Google-specific audience segments and affinity segments that they had available. And so I think, there will be a bigger push for these different digital publishers outside of social. I just think that you're going to see everyone's going to still have to reach voters, and they're going to, you're going to tap out on Facebook inventory and Instagram inventory at some point. To me, that's the biggest thing we're working on right now. And then, like Laura was saying, like what other team is using technology on the campaign to reach people. Just like Kevin was saying before, is like peer-to-peer is going to be a big thing, and not taking away from digital ads dollars, but just in the way that we kind of think about how are we spending to talk to voters through tech.
So I completely agree with that. I think that as far as our media planning is concerned, I think having that communication between the ad side and any other digital efforts that are being used, I think is going to be really important, and making sure that it's an immersive experience and making sure that there's a consistency that's kind of felt there, making sure that we're driving like the necessary reach frequency across some of these different channels. But I do think a lot of that does, obviously, there's a lot of testing involved, as you kind of alluded to. So we're really working through it, but media plans change every cycle anyway, so I think that this isn't anything that's necessarily groundbreaking, but it's still just trying to find the answers. And I know that, as Laura alluded to, there's the opportunity that some of these 2019 races presented to be able to talk about like how are we adjusting to these things and being able to start jumpstart that testing a little bit earlier, which is I think a large advantage going into 2020.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that these changes weren't in place when we were running our elections in 2019, and so I think we're all kind of working that out right now, and we don't have the right answer yet, and it would be irresponsible to say that we do, because we have to go out there and find out and do the work and do the testing. I would agree that there's some outside digital publishers that are going to be interesting this cycle in ways that they weren't last cycle, but it just comes back to figuring it out with our good creative and cross-platform but I don't think any of us are totally there yet.
Well, and you all have talked about, and as you mentioned, Tim mentioned earlier, everyone needs to start working together. It's not just, creative, and it's not just ad buys, and this is said a lot, but it doesn't necessarily, it still always seems to be a challenge. How are you guys sort of trying to get through that internally? Do you have any solutions that you've come up with?
Yeah, so as far as the internal side, for us, our ad buying team sits right next to our creative facing team. And so we're able to really work with them in order to see what's working and what's not and really provide a good feedback loop there. Additionally, then we bring all that information to our client teams who are working on emails, P2Ps, rentals, all that fun stuff. So really we're able to try and make it as immersive an experience as possible, just making sure that communication is always open between these platforms.
I think having the experience of working in congressional races for a number of years now on digital is understanding what worked well in 2016, what worked well in 2018 when we brought more of the teams together and kind of de-siloed everything, and in 2020 being able to be like the creative team and the ads buying team should be talking to each other the whole day, and right, like the buying team wants to place here, here, and here, walking the creative team through, really with numbers, I found is very helpful for them, why we place there and why certain pieces of the work that they create work better for our audience than others. And again, this cycle, trying to get the data team involved in the digital buying too, and understanding how we build our plans, who we're trying to reach, and how that aligns with the non-digital ways that we're communicating with people too, is what we've got going on.
The DG is a little bit wonky on this regard just because of the ways that we're able to engage in the different states really varies based on compliance and how we're able to raise money. But I think what's key for us right now is being able to go back and do our debriefs. We've been having a lot of meetings this month and really analyzing what worked for us in Louisiana and Kentucky last year and how that's going to apply going into this cycle. Really setting that groundwork and best practices at this stage as we go forward into 2020 and break out into some of our AEs and table operations. Laying the groundwork now, bringing everyone together and having those conversations early this year is the phase that we're at.
Well, do you find that, because you sort of have that sort of leg up where you have these campaigns that you can look back on and see what worked, what didn't, and move forward with best practices, what would be maybe the overall, like, one thing that you would say to everyone, this is really what works, this, and I know, obviously, as you said, with different campaigns and different people and locations, it's going to be different, but is there something that you can take from that?
Ooh, that's $1 million question. I think that for us, what we always return to at the DGA is it's really different depending on what state you're in. I know that's a boring answer, but if I gave you one answer that worked in Louisiana, it would have been really different to what's in Kentucky. So I think staying true to that state and that voters and that candidate is key. I think on the digital front, like what we saw a lot of in terms of like our best practices for ads and targeting digital creative, are going to be a little bit more difficult to apply in terms of persuasion and turnout. So I think that's a challenge that we've gone back to on the Google and YouTube side. But I do think broadly that the best practices in terms of what worked in 2019 are going to lay like a good roadmap for us in a Trump year because it worked for us last year, and being able to pull those best practices even if we can't take the specifics of what worked for us in terms of the ad targeting side.
So I think as far as some of the work that we've done in 2019, particularly on the social side, one thing that we've seen that's really been a boost has been the increased inventory that Facebook has had on the in-stream video side. And so with that, we've really been able to kind of drive like shorter, using that buzzword again, digital first creative that's kind of within people's video content. And we've been able to drive video watch rates that have been pretty equivalent to some more video native platforms with the scale of social. So that's been something that we've been excited about going into 2020.
Absolutely video. And also, when was our special? It was in September in North Carolina 9. We lost, but really, really close race there. did a number of digital tests and found it was really interesting. We tested a couple of things, a couple of different spots, and obviously people talking to the camera when it's on YouTube is just going to work well, but also our static creative that's encouraging people to go vote. It's never the designs that you think, right? And we sometimes, very rarely, find a design that's a person looking to the camera with Go Vote who looks like they're a neighbor winning from a display perspective. I've always found pretty curious. It's always folks who just want the facts, like when the election is, and the URL of how they can look up their polling place.
Well, now just before we open up to questions, as Patrick was talking about earlier, they're dealing with, whether it's Google or Facebook, dealing with certain problems, maybe not the right problems. I think that all of you sort of agree with that. What do you think, what should be the problems that we should be looking at? And on the back end of that, do you think it's something that that the government should come in and regulate in some way, as a blanket rule?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd echo what Patrick said earlier, and as we've all discussed, that I think it's a little bit misguided in the ad changes that we've been making. I think the real problem that we need to be looking at is disinformation, false info on social media. It's chiefly organic, and I think a lot of these ad changes are completely disregarding that in favor of just a blanket ban or micro-targeting, as we've seen. We saw firsthand a real instance of that this year in 2019 in Kentucky. Immediately following the election, there was a coordinated domestic campaign to try and paint Andy Bashir as not the winner of the election, and like a voter fraud issue. We saw immediately after his campaign ended. So it's real and it's happening, and it's going to happen on a much larger scale in 2020. And so I think it's really important to look at these problems critically. I think some further cross-platform regulation would be great in terms of disinfo. We already do it for television, and I think there needs to be a way to adapt that online.
I fully agree. Rule one, listen to Patrick Stevenson. But they, like I said earlier, they're trying to solve for this disinformation problem that they're having, and banning political ads doesn't do that. And it's really interesting too, like just from an empirical standpoint, when we're calling up these different social platforms, our reps there, the Dem side at least, and talking about these changes, and we're coming with them being like, this is so bad for the way that voters receive information. We place ads with accurate information about voting, with accurate information about our candidates and our opponents' records, and it's met with like a little bit of a pause and a little bit of a confusion, and not always met with a plan to adjust their product to account for disinfo. So, really tough cycle when we're prioritizing disinformation, and it's great that from one standpoint that platforms think that this could be a solution. Definitely not a solution if you, have placements like Facebook where you're able to, if you're a political candidate, have untruths or lies in your ads, and they're still able to run. If you're on Twitter and world leaders have a different policy about the truthfulness or the content that they post on Twitter versus us as private, more or less citizens. And so, I would love to see them solve for that in very real ways. And I do think it's by working with the party committee, smart people who spend a lot of money, people who run campaigns to really adjust these products, because they're being used as civic tools, and we know from the DC crowd that our partners at these platforms want to use them as a civic tool. And so how can we work with them to make sure that we can still run ads, but also they're attacking the disinfo problem?
I agree with what's been said. I think that disinformation is definitely a problem that a lot of these platforms are facing. I do just think that kind of cross-platform regulation does open up a whole can of worms, and I feel like there's maybe not necessarily a way to do that right now, just in an environment that's completely changing, and I don't necessarily know if the government is like the most equipped to be able to take that on at this moment. But I think that overall, I think leaving it in the hands of these platforms that know what questions they're answering for and everything is going to be helpful. But I think one area where we can continue to grow and improve is transparency behind a lot of these policies. And I think that there are certain networks that are doing that better than others.
The one other thing I would add, I think it's just not working what we're doing right now in terms of leaving it in the hands of the platforms in a way that I would just illustrate with one example, which is in Louisiana. We had 3 ads by our opponent taken down off TV because they were demonstrably false, but all of those ads continue to run online on Facebook and on YouTube. So I think that just illustrates the challenges that we're facing here, and I think most of us would agree that politicians and those groups that support them shouldn't be able to run false ads on social platforms.
Fully agree too. And a lot of conversation lately is if the FCC has these rules about TV, how is digital run by a different set of rules? I think for me personally, shouldn't be, if an ad is taken down on TV, logically we would probably take the ad down on digital because we would think that it's in violation of a law. And so, I think that there could be some middle ground where there's a solution where we're able to get some help from, folks like Elizabeth Warren, or you're seeing a number of Democratic nominees have platforms that specifically address this question without Twitter becoming, a public good and a public service.
Yeah, I think that just the challenge there is making sure that the regulation is done in a responsible way and making sure that it's not any sort of knee-jerk reaction to any one specific example, but really is combating some of the problems that we're seeing.
So maybe just getting some sort of, committee of, everyone, all different affiliates, different ideas, different ways of thinking and talking about it and putting something together.
Yeah, I think just making sure that the problem is approached as not just big tech with one giant blanket and a magic wand, because I think that every platform has some different questions and information that they're providing. Definitely,
and different impacts. So, well, do we have any questions for our panel here? Well, actually, I do want to end it with one last final question, which is, do you still think social media is the best way to reach voters? Just an easy one.
Yeah. So I think as far as, obviously there's an audience there that we want to make sure that we're hitting. I think that it's a great way to drive a message and be able to kind of increase our reach, increase our frequency to some of these audiences. I think one of the things that social, and in saying social, Facebook really has going for it is the fact that it is able to really pace well, spend, just so when you kind of get towards the nitty-gritty at the end of the cycle, you have more confidence that that money is going to be spent, and I think that's one thing that it really has going for it. I think it's a great strategy, but I always think the word best is so subjective.
Yeah, it depends, right, on what you're trying to get that voter to do. We know from the research that the best way to get someone who's an infrequent voter to go vote is to have that conversation with them face-to-face at their door. But that's not always possible. So I think, as Ryan mentioned at the beginning of this panel, there's a lot of folks on the Democratic side who aren't going to engage with us or aren't reachable through some of our direct field operations. Everyone virtually is on one social platform or another, so I think it's critical.
I will say the added benefit of it being a paid solution and an organic solution just makes it so much stronger, right? You could say, it's fine if you pull ads on Twitter, we'll do a peer-to-peer only program, but peer-to-peer paying. Very few of us have persuadable voters in our phone that a party committee or a campaign needs to actually talk to. We rely on our partners and voter file data to do that, and we're paying for that service. And so it's very it's a great avenue because there's great organic content, like Sean's saying, like giving people an immersive experience, and there's great paid content so that, you know, you have a big YouTube presence, you have a huge Facebook presence, you used to have a pretty solid Twitter presence to make sure you're finding people if they're in your paid universe or your supporter universe.
I wanted to ask a little bit about some of the granularity of some of the local differences. Laura, you mentioned that you had two very different campaigns last year, and they had different profiles. So I'm curious, all of you are working across many different regions and many different levels of local campaigns. What sort of variations are you seeing in the social media profiles around the country, and how much adjustment do you have to make to what the nature of the penetration is in different areas, what particular platforms are and aren't favored in particular areas? What kind of differences are you seeing?
Yeah, it differs hugely, not only like from state to state, but also within different regions of the state. So a lot of times the way that like we'll start before making any media plan is taking a look at the different media markets throughout the state and assessing like the best way that we can reach those folks and what that mix looks like, whether it's more digital heavy or TV heavy at the baseline in different areas, but then digging down. I think the data is probably a little bit more difficult to come by in terms of platform differences across the states and different regions in our races, but I think that for us, it begins with taking a look at that data at the outset, and then developing your plan to most effectively target people where you might be missing them. So that's kind of like the top level that we begin with.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that we're always really focused on what is going to be the best strategy and looking at those media markets, making sure that if TV can do a little bit more of the lifting, letting that happen versus places where it may not be as effective. So I think that's always the first place to start. And then I think from there, that's where we start on the outset, and then from there we continue to iterate as the campaign's going on, as we're starting to get some results back and really being able to then optimize throughout a campaign's life.
I really like to look at reach reports, especially with congressionals, and different platforms have varying level of quality of a reach report, but you know, the amount of people who are online and able to reach, and devices that are able to reach in New York 11, Staten Island, a little bit of Brooklyn is very different than Fresno, California for California 21. And so for us, like, it's always, because we're also working with campaigns and giving them advice on spend and media mix, right? Like the spend level in Florida 26, it's Miami and the Keys, is going to be very different than a spend level in a more rural district where we just know there's not a ton of broadband access, there aren't a lot of devices there to reach. And so fun challenge at the D-Trip is like really thinking through how many voters we know we need to reach, and then also how many voters are in our media mix these reach reports are telling us we can.
Are you guys seeing social principally as a conversion, acquisition channel, or are you really seeing it as a persuasion channel?
Both.
Both.
Yeah, I think it's both for sure.
And it was, I will say too, like the takeaway, a lot of it last cycle, at least with the Democratic Party, right, and why people who've come up through digital fundraising backgrounds on the progressive side now run digital ad shops, is because it was brought to us like raise more money, Trump has Facebook ads, you need Facebook ads. And then we were doing all these interesting creative testing and understanding audiences a little bit more. And then we were like, this also works to get people to vote in Georgia 6. It's tweaked these ways and the audience is different. But I do think that's why it's both.
And finally, I want to do one devil's advocate question, since we've been hearing hand-wringing all morning about misinformation on the social channels and how the social channels are sort of missing the mark in the various new policies they're putting in. Let's not make TV seem so pristine just because the FCC has rules about it. We see a lot of borderline misinformation that is countered by opposing ads, by ads that argue back, that try to expose the lies. Why don't we see more of that in social media? The targeting is there, the tools are there to be able to take those same tactics that we use in TV to counter misinformation and apply it in social.
Well, so you used to be able to do that, right? Like we could, if we found, or plan to, if we found a, knew that there was a false ad running on YouTube, you could respond with a response ad on YouTube targeted to who you think your opponent might be trying to reach. And when we're limited by YouTube, it limits our ability to have that strategy. So it's more of like, that was a good plan in 2018, 2016. It's not going to be the plan the same way in 2020. Then I also think something with the reason why we highlight more misinformation, disinformation online might simply be because we can see reach data about it. We can see how folks are engaging on it. We can see when someone gets ratioed. And I think that helps us be like, that's a big thing. Like, that's a lot. That's several thousand people. That's hundreds of thousands of people seeing something demonstrably false. The president with millions of followers is retweeting something demonstrably false, or it's a video of the Speaker of the House slowed down. And I just think that, we just have a reaction to that because we can see the number of engagement.
Yeah. The example that I gave earlier was pretty black and white, but obviously there's a lot of gray area here in terms of like messaging and truth and falsehoods that we have to consider. I think like the challenge maybe in some past cycles that we could see false ads that they're targeting our candidates, but it's just so much more granular than seeing a television ad that I think kind of frames the conversation in a different way, that now, like Ryan said, our ability to respond to some of those subgroups is a lot more limited on Google and YouTube. But I think it also returns to the granularity of it. That's going to be a challenge for all of us, I think, this year.
Lisa, panel, thanks so much. That was great. Thank you.